Good afternoon everyone. In this video, I will be giving you a technical breakdown of my code and a walkthrough of my vending machine program. Firstly, I imported the time library to use the time sleep function. I then made variable cache, where inputted cache will be stored, and variables stock 1 to 9 for item stocks. Here we start with a print function that's a welcoming message. After that, I implemented the time-sleep function to delay the next set of texts by a second to add a transition between them. Next, I made a nested dictionary named items to store the dictionary's chocolates, soft drinks, and chips. These three are the categories with the keys named item name, item code, item price, and item stock within each of them. Each key has their corresponding value. I then made a function named displayList to neatly display the categories, items, and their information by using a for loop. The for loop loops through the dictionaries, and I formatted the keys and values by using the fstring function. I added a row of hyphens to add a design. Lastly, we call the function. I used the timesleep function again to delay the next set of texts, and here I made a variable cache2 with a prompt for the user to insert any amount of cache. The input is then added to the variable cache, which has a value of 0. Next, I made a function named selections with the argument cost to keep track of the amount of cache after a user is done buying an item. We then turn the variable cache into a global variable for it to be used outside the current scope. Its condition is, if the user's cache balance is greater than or equal to the cost, it will subtract the cache balance to the cost. I then made a function named itemStock with the argument numbers to keep track of item stocks after a user is done buying an item. We also make the variable stock1 into a global variable for it to be used outside the current scope. Its condition is, if stock1 is greater than or equal to numbers, it will subtract stock1 to numbers and then print how many stocks the item has left. I made 8 more of the same function for the other 8 item stock variables. We then move on to the main program where I made the function named purchasing process. It starts with the declaration of the global variable cache, so we can call it outside of its scope. I then made a variable named selectionActive and set it to true and implemented a while loop to allow users to purchase items. So while variable selectionActive is true, it will print a message to show how much money the user has left and display a prompt with the name selection to ask the user to input the code of the item they want to purchase. Next, I implemented nested if-elif statements for the different item choices. If the user has inputted the item code A1, it will go through a series of nested if-elif statements before it reaches the else statement, which contains the information to dispense the item and more. First, it will go through the condition if stock1 is less than 1. If this condition is true, then it will tell the user that the item they want is out of stock. If this condition is false, then it will move on to the next condition, which is elif cache is equivalent to 0 or cache is less than or equivalent to 1.94, which is 0.1 less than the item price. If this condition is true, it will tell the user that their cache balance is insufficient and will ask them if they want to input more cash to their current balance. They will go through another if statement wherein if they input yes, then it will tell the user to add more cash. If they input any other key, it will skip this process and then the program asks the user if they would like to continue buying items. Lastly, if this condition is false, it will move on to the else statement where it will print out a message saying that the item has been dispensed. It will also print out a message that suggests the user another item to buy. The condition will then call the selection function with the price of the item as its argument. The cash amount will then be subtracted to the price. Lastly, it will call the item stock function with 1 as its argument, as 1 will be subtracted to the item stock amount. It will then print a message telling the user how many stocks the item has left. This process is the same for the 8 other choices. For this one, and this one, and finally this one. Now, when the user inputs an invalid item code, it will print a message saying that the input is not an item code. It will then move on to the variable repeat with a prompt asking the user if they would like to continue buying more items. I implemented another if statement in which the program will end and print out the user's total change, and a goodbye message if the variable repeat is equivalent to no. Else, it will loop to the beginning. Finally, we call the purchasing process function. That's it for my code. Thank you for listening.